My name's Steve Poftak. I'm the executive director of the Rappaport Institute. I'm thrilled that all of you could come here and join us. As is traditional with our events here at District Hall, we bring inclement weather with us. Last time we were here with the citywide analytics team, we also managed to get a couple inches of snow as well. So we will work on that. We'll do a June or July event next, I promise. I'd really like to welcome all of you here on behalf of not only the Rappaport Institute, but also our partners in the Boston Public Schools and District Hall. It's been great to work with all of you. And at the Rappaport Institute, you know, this is a particularly exciting topic for us, this transportation challenge. It sort of hits at this nexus of these great policy areas, transportation, education, and innovation. And we're really thrilled to be a part of it. And I would like to pay some tribute to Boston Public Schools for their willingness to take on this challenge and for really their commitment, their confidence, and their constitution around this particular topic. The commitment to transparency. As a public entity, it can be scary to release data to the public to work with. And I think we showed, or I think they showed with the assignment process that some interesting things, some innovation can come out of that. So the commitment to doing that, I think, is really important. Also the confidence to do that. This is a challenge. The expectation is that folks will come up with innovative solutions. Not everyone's going to be happy with every aspect of every solution. And I think to have the confidence to go out there, to try to do things differently, to try to procure innovation and ideas differently, I think really takes a degree of confidence. And I think that's worth noting. Lastly, in regards to the Boston Public Schools, I also want to pay tribute to their constitution for doing this. It's difficult to understand in a large, operationally complex system like a Boston Public Schools just how complex it is, right? 56,000 students at 125 schools, responsibility for transporting 25,000 children a day to, I believe it's 250 plus locations. It's an enormously complex task. And it's so easy to be so focused on the operational day-to-day complexity that it's difficult to step back and think strategically. And I think it's really wonderful that we've taken this moment and we've taken up this challenge to think strategically. What can we do to make the system better? So thank you to the Boston Public Schools, and also thank you to the participants, the folks who have come here to take up the challenge. We really encourage you to bring your ideas, bring your innovations here. You know, this is important on so many levels. It's important to the students in the system. I brought two. They're sitting there in the back. If you have any questions, please please ask them. You know, the budget request this year is $120 million on transportation. In a resource-constrained environment, to the extent that we can be more efficient in the way we transport students, it gives us options to put the money to other uses, which I think is particularly important. And just beyond the students, it's also incredibly important to the city as a whole, sort of how we educate our children, how we run, how it impacts the rest of the transportation system, how it impacts commuters and businesses and folks. It's a really important problem, and we are very grateful that you have taken time out on a fairly blustery Saturday morning here to come join us. So, thank you and welcome on behalf of the Rappaport Institute, District Hall, and the Boston Public Schools. And up next, I'd like to briefly introduce Superintendent Tommy Chang. He started in 2015, which hardly seems true. I feel like 2015 seems like it's been longer than that. Previous to his position as superintendent of the Boston Public Schools, he was a local instructional superintendent for the LA Unified School District. Previous to that, he was a special assistant to the superintendent in the same LA Unified School District. He's been a teacher. He's been a principal. He holds a doctorate in educational leadership from Loyola Marymount. He has 2 masters in education and got his bachelor's from UPenn, and we are thrilled to have him join us this morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Chang. I'm dropping. That's the proverbial mic drop, I think.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Steve, for your comments. Great that we have a BPS parent that kicked us off this morning. Couple of quick introductions. Regina Robinson, school committee member. Michael Lecanto, where's Michael Lecanto, school committee member. Thank you both for joining today. Couple of special thank yous. Today would not have happened if it wasn't for three people who have taken on the main kind of thrust of the responsibility to make sure this day happens. So John Hanlon, COO of Boston Public Schools, you'll hear from him a little bit later. Jonathan Steckity, who is our Director of Transportation, who is in the back, and Will over there. Will is our Strategic Project Manager for Boston Public Schools. So thanks to all of you. It's an odd kind of timing, right? April 1st. To do something like this. But there have been also some other amazing events that have happened on April 1st, April Fool's Day, in the course of human history and our country's history. I did a little research this morning. In 1789, the U.S. House of Representatives had its first meeting in Philadelphia. So that happened on April 1st. 2004, Google introduced Gmail. Everybody thought that was going to fail, but that has been a wide, incredible success. And in 1979, Apple was actually formed in Cupertino, California. So great things can happen on April 1st, and I hope that we continue that tradition. I want to echo some of Steve's observation about the kind of novelty of an event like this. In public school systems, we have to be focused on daily minutia. Our kids need to get to school on time. Teachers need to be in classrooms. Our principals need to be leading our schools. We need to serve kids lunch. We serve 57,000 kids lunch and breakfast each and every single day. We need to get our buses need to be safe. I mean, there's so much day-to-day minutia. So for those rare opportunities where we have an opportunity to pull away, and Steve said to think strategically. For me, I think almost to think disruptively. We got to take advantage of those opportunities, and to be able to crowdsource solutions like how NASA does and Google does, XPRIZE does. It is an approach to solving some complex problems in public education that we typically don't utilize. So I'm glad that we are doing this today. For those that may not know this, just another random thing, XPRIZE, which uses this sort of design to solve problems by crowdsourcing solutions. XPRIZE currently has an educational challenge as well. Our prize is $15,000. Their prize is $15 million right now. Their prize basically asks for the creation of shareware software that can be utilized on tablets, help illiterate young people from undeveloped countries to read in 18 months. And I think there are actually two finalists for that, but it's a $15 million prize. Ours is only $15,000 and a statue in front of the bowling building. So, as Steve said, transportation is one of our most baffling issues. We are trying to transport 30,000 kids each and every day to over 200 locations. But today's challenge is it's not going to be about policy necessarily. It's more of a technical issue. We are trying to figure out how we improve routing efficiencies and balance bell times in Boston Public Schools. And we need to solve this in both a sustainable and a city-wide way. And John will talk next about that solution, so I wanted to maybe quickly go through a slide to give you some context about BPS. BPS is transportation system. Okay, so I'm going to start with this slide. What this slide shows is 10 big ideas that were generated as part of a long-term financial planning process for Boston Public Schools. And this report relied on a group of stakeholders from across the city to generate a long list of ideas that BPS should explore to improve its financial health. Two of the big ideas were about ways to generate more money in BPS. Of the remaining 8 ideas, 3 out of those 8 ideas had to do with transportation. Ideas number 1 and 2 were around kind of routing implications. Idea number 3 was mainly focused on maximizing efficiencies in transportation. And today we're going to try to focus on kind of big idea number 3, how do we maximize efficiencies in our transportation system? Next slide. Thank you. This graph shows the per pupil transportation costs in the 200 largest public school systems in the US from 2013. Part of the reason that this represents such a high financial priority for a district is that we do have the second highest transportation cost per student in the country. And the reason for this is twofold. First, we transport more students across greater distances than most other school districts. And second, we have a higher operating cost than our peer districts. Boston, as you all know, is a very difficult place to navigate. And it has a very high cost of living. And so because of that, Boston Public Schools spends 5 times more per student than a typical school district our size. Next slide talks about riders by type and total cost over the last several years. As you can see, while our costs have steadily increased, up $30 million from 2012, which is about a $7 million annual growth rate, this has happened while the number of our yellow bus drivers have actually decreased. We've moved 7th and 8th graders off of school buses onto MBTA, and we've changed how we've assigned students to our schools to get them closer to home, yet our costs continue to increase. Lastly, another reason for our comparatively high costs of transportation has to do with the imbalance we currently have with our school start times. Currently, we have a 7:30 start time for some schools, an 8:30 start time for some schools, and 9:30 start time for some schools. The vast majority of our schools and a higher number of our schools are in our 7:30 and 8:30 time slots as compared to our 9:30. So they're not balanced. We know that 7:30 and 8:30 are preferable to families, so we've done our best to have more schools open at 7:30 and 8:30. But because of this lack of balancing, it causes inefficiencies as well. One of our major aims of this challenge is to develop a methodology that will allow us to balance our start times, but to do it in a very equitable way. So I'm going to close and turn it over to John. I want to say again, while we are trying to figure out technical solutions, we also cannot lose fact that when we pick kids up, we take them to school, we drop them out of school, we pick them up from school, take them home, we really are influencing the greater experience of students with Boston Public Schools. So what you are trying to solve for, while it's a technical solution, it's also a solution that has to be grounded in deep empathy for the young people's experience in our school systems. If we could do this, if we could find greater efficiencies in our transportation system, as Steve said, we could unlock resources to reinvest into our classrooms, into our schools, and that is ultimately what we all want. And if one of the unintended consequences of finding more efficiencies is that we can decrease our carbon footprint and improve traffic flow, even better. Our buses currently drive 45,000 miles per day and release 170,000 pounds of CO2 each and every day. So if we can get more efficient with that as part of the work today, even greater. So with that, I want to thank you all again for coming today. Let's figure out some solutions together, just like yesterday South Carolina beat UConn and broke what we thought was an unbeatable streak. I hope that we can start changing the direction of some of those graphs today. I turn over to you, John. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chang. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, especially braving the weather that we have out there. It's obviously unfortunate that we've been dealt with the weather that we have, but it's also a testament to really what BPS transportation has to do, because as long as school's in session, we need to deliver kids to school and then back to home no matter what the weather looks like. What I'm really hoping for coming out of today is I'm hoping that we can all look at the district about 2 years from now, maybe 3 years from now, and look back at today and think today was a moment of change for Boston Public Schools, because we'll be in a district 2 or 3 years from now where we're able to unlock some funds to reinvest in the classroom, as Dr. Chang has said. We'll be in a district where our routes are running much more efficiently, where on-time performance is even better, where we have a very tightly managed, efficient system of transportation across the district to allow us to do what school districts need to do, which is invest funds in classrooms to teach their children. I'd like to take a pause and ask you all to just look around a little bit, just a little bit. Come on, look around, don't look at me. Okay. I have never been in a room this smart before, okay? Like, this is really impressive. This room right now probably has more brain power in it than any location in the Eastern Seaboard. So because of that, I'm gonna go a little bit lightning round style on you right now, partly too because I don't wanna stand in the way of the Rockstar panel that we have coming up soon, okay? Anyway, let's move on. This is our starting point. Okay, now that is not an alien spider attack on the city of Boston. It's not a scene from the Deathly Hallows. This is actually an enormous number of lines connecting all of our students' addresses, randomized students' addresses, thanks to an institute at Boston University who's done this work for us, to the schools that they attend. We want you to help us do this very efficiently, okay? In order to do that, we need to create routes, efficient routes. The first stop in that is literally stops. This picture here is a neighborhood in East Boston. And in this picture, you'll see a series of red pins. Those red pins represent the randomized, again, this is not real data, randomized addresses of students who are picked up at street corners in East Boston. Each of the yellow pins represents one of those street corner bus stops. And if you notice, even though we try to get groups of students to every one of those bus stops, we even have some inefficiencies there. If you look at the yellow pin in the bottom left of the map, there's only one student going to that bus stop. Okay? Again, there's some inefficiency there. Moving on, you see the green pins on the map. Those are addresses of door-to-door students. Those students, because of an IEP or 504 plan, might have a transportation accommodation, which dictates that they need to be picked up at their homes. Okay? So for every one of those bus stops, we're typically only picking up one student. Now, moving on from there, first you have to do bus stops, then you have to do trips. This here is a picture of a neighborhood in Dorchester where you actually have a bus starting in North Dorchester and then connecting all the way through into Mattapan where it drops off out of school. A few things that I'll call out here. As you can see in one of the blue call-out boxes, our trips average about 6 bus stops, every one of them. This one here, as you can see, is only able to pick up at 4. And that speaks to one of the great challenges that we have in transportation. If you notice the long stretches of distance between the second pickup and the third, and then between the third and the fourth, that's what we're dealing with in the city today. And it speaks to what our transportation team often describes as running out of time before you run out of space. And what's happening here is we only have an hour to pick up from the, say, 7:30 drop-off at the previous school to the 8:30 drop-off at the next. And within that hour, we only have the time it takes to get to those 4 bus stops and then to the school. Again, we run out of time. And that way we have a largely empty bus, and again, more and more inefficiency. Now, once you've done the stops, then the trips, then you have to assemble the routes. And that's what we have here. Essentially, this boils down to fleet management. And what we have here is 3, again, randomized route sets for the district. And I want to call out a few differences and inefficiencies that you'll see here. Bus 101 looks great. It's serving 3 schools in the morning and 3 schools in the afternoon. As Dr. Chang mentioned, we have 3 start times for that reason, because we want to maximize our resources and have our buses serve 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. But if you look more closely, the first trip of the day for Bus 101 has 30 minutes of what we call deadhead time. That's time spent without picking up any students, without any students being on board. Again, there's some inefficiency there. Now, Bus 102 and 103 are a little bit more problematic. 102 is only serving 2 schools in the morning and afternoon, and Bus 103 is only serving 1. There's a very good chance that Bus 103 is serving a student who's assigned to a private special education facility outside of Boston, which we often have to do and we're happy to do. But again, it causes some inefficiency in the system. Okay. So, all of this basically leads to a large and incredibly complex system. This is one of our favorite slides. We call it the Brady Bunch slide. Okay? So I'm not going to call out all of the characters in the Brady Bunch, but I'll pick on a few boxes here. As has already been mentioned, we serve 231 schools across the district and beyond. And part of the reason why that's so high, in fact, it's more than 100 higher than the number of schools we have in BPS, is because by law, we need to serve the charter schools in Boston who require transportation, the parochial schools in Boston who require transportation, and the private schools in Boston who require transportation, and the special education facilities outside of Boston where our BPS students are assigned. A few other things. Note the differences between the bus stops in the bottom left and the number of times a bus stops each day. That would be where Alice was on the Brady Bunch board. The difference between the two there is, yes, we only have about 5,000 bus stops, but our buses stop more than 20,000 times every single day. Each one of them stops more than 20,000 times each day. And the reason why there's such a disparity there is because our bus stops themselves typically serve multiple buses. And then the last couple of points I'll bring up. Yes, we're here today for the transportation challenge because we want our system to be more efficient, we want to reduce costs, and certainly a $120 million budget request for FY18, 10% of the district budget is huge. But as Dr. Chang has mentioned, this is also an environmental concern. I mean, our buses are releasing 170,000 pounds of CO2 every day. And we're trying to improve with that. We've actually done wonders in transportation in bringing in propane buses to reduce our carbon emissions, but this is still a major challenge. Okay, moving on. There are a lot of different trends that only add complexity to the data that I've already shared with you. I'm only going to call out a couple right now. For starters, our ridership has decreased. And you'd expect with decreased ridership, you'd see decreased routes. But instead, our routes have actually plateaued. That's a challenge. It creates a problem. Part of the reason for that, if you move on, is that the number of our stops has increased, especially our door-to-door stops across the district, which, as you can see here, have increased by a 5% growth rate in the last 5 years. And again, I want to be really clear, we're very proud to be able to serve the students in Boston who have transportation accommodations, who need these door-to-door accommodations, but it is a trend worth exploring. Okay, now moving on to why you're actually really here, the transportation challenge. The transportation challenge boils down to 2 essential goals that we want to achieve over the next few months. First and foremost, we're looking for many of you and others across the world to create an algorithm that will automate our routes efficiently and reliably. We would love for every year around late spring to be able to feed all of our student data into a system with the schools they're assigned to and any transportation accommodations they have. Hit a button and right away get efficient, reliable routes. It's not possible right now, although we're working on it. Second, we want to be able to create a series of bell times that are equitably and efficiently balanced. As Dr. Chang has mentioned, we have 3 start times, generally speaking, across the district, 7:30, 8:30, and 9:30. We know that they're imbalanced right now, which again leads to inefficiency and extra cost. We also know that many of our parents don't like them. We want to be able to create something different. And in fact, what we're looking for people to do is completely rethink how we think about start times. It could be that we only need 2 start times across the district. if we're able to still reduce cost and route our buses efficiently enough to make that happen. It could be that we still have 3 start times, but because our routes are so much more efficient, we only need a 45-minute window between the 3 tiers and not an hour, in which case maybe we have 7:15, 8 o'clock, and 8:45. Diving into the first of those 2 goals, I'll give a very brief overview of the routing challenge. As you can see here, the timeline will run from today, April 1st, until May 19th, when we'll announce the award recipients for the routing challenge. This is probably a good time to remind you, I know many of you have already seen.
Are the buses in this problem fixed, or is there, can we rejigger the fee itself? More small buses, more big buses, whatever?
Let me speak to that in just a couple minutes. It's a good question. As you can see here, again, it goes from April 1st to May 19th. One thing I'd call out, I think this is a good time to remind you all, I know many of you have already been to the Transportation Challenge website, but if you haven't, please check it out. It's bostonpublicschools.org/transportation challenge. You'll see all sorts of information related to everything that we're discussing today, including this presentation. And I will get to your question in just a second. Moving a little bit deeper into the routing challenge, yes, we want this to be able to automate efficient, reliable routes for us, but we actually want it to be a lot more than that as well. We need our buses to achieve a high rate of on-time performance. And believe me, our bus drivers, which are probably the best bus drivers in the country, are doing their darndest to make that happen, but we have some room for growth there. We also want participants in this challenge to think creatively, come up with creative ideas, push the boundaries of policies and practices to make sure that we're really being as innovative as we can with the solutions that we come up with. On that note, to answer your question, we do need to work within a constrained environment, and one of our breakout sessions will address that a little bit more. But that brings me to the last point that we have here. We want those of you participating in this to think of this part of the challenge, the routing challenge, as creating a flexible tool that will allow us to test different policy changes, to test different assumptions related to things. Yes, we work within a constrained environment today, but what would it look like if you changed some of those parameters? If the nature of our fleet changed, to your question, or if our walk-to-stop distances increased? How much more would that allow us to save? If we stopped grandfathering students from previous assignment systems? These kinds of questions come up all the time, and we're not able to answer them with as much information as we'd like, because we don't have that kind of a tool. Now, moving on to the second part. Oh, you can skip past this, I'm sorry. Moving on to the second part of the transportation challenge, the start time challenge. Essentially, it starts today, but really, we want people to go through the routing challenge because in order to really assess our start times and better understand how you can move around different start times, you really need to understand how routing works. So we've planned this sequentially for that reason. And because of that, we don't expect the start time challenge to really begin until late May. And it will run until early July, according to the timeline that we have here. One quick note on the timelines, by the way, and there's notes around this within the Transportation Challenge document as well. These timelines are subject to change as we learn more and more about the nature of the work and how people are working through these problems with us, but we will make sure to clarify those as much as possible to all participants in the event. We don't expect drastic changes, I can be clear about that. Diving a little bit deeper into the start times challenge, what we really want people to do is we want their solutions to address a tension point in the system and to allow us to consider trade-offs that are inherent as we think of the 2 different extremes of reducing cost as much as possible or accommodating school preference for start times as much as possible. To help with the latter, we will very soon be releasing a survey to all schools asking them for their input related to start times. We want to know what are their preferences for start times. And we also want to caveat that question with guidance to them to let them understand that if they all tell us we want 8:30, it's probably not going to work unless we, spend all of the district's money in transportation and have very little else for schools. But we do want school input to be a foundational element to this work. And so by the time the start time challenge really kicks off in earnest, we plan to release data from those school surveys to participants so they understand what they're dealing with regard to people's preferences for start time. But again, we want people to also be able to manage those trade-offs and potentially create a solution that's flexible enough to give us multiple proposals. Here's what it would look like if you went far toward reducing cost and maybe didn't accommodate input as much. But here are the benefits of those savings you'd be able to reinvest. Here's what it would look like if you didn't reduce cost as much, but really accommodated school input as much as possible. To help with all of this, we're going to be releasing a ton of data starting today. And I'm not going to go over all the data points that you have here. You'll be able to see that on the slide or in the Transportation Challenge website. One thing I do want to be really clear about, though, is we're very mindful of data privacy laws. We've worked extremely closely with the BPS legal office and the legal office of the City of Boston to make sure that we're doing everything appropriately with regard to what we're releasing. And on that note, as you've heard me mention before, we've worked very closely with an institute at Boston University that's allowed us to anonymize our data in an incredibly sophisticated way. We're also working very closely with other thought leaders in this space to make sure that we're randomizing or anonymizing our data in such a way as to not give away any true identities or special education accommodations or anything along those lines. We're really trying to be mindful of the laws as much as possible. Now, after that brief disclaimer, moving on to what we're looking from folks. We're looking from data from our participants as well. And in particular, we're looking for 3 different things. First, a memo that outlines how you solved the problem. What are the assumptions that you made? How did you go about building your model? Second, a memo that will share with us how you envision a potential partnership with Boston Public Schools unfolding in the future, if you do see one. If you don't, maybe you plan to open source your solution to allow the world to have access to it and improve upon it. And third, again, we're looking for data. This is a simple output table that we'd be looking for across the 2 challenges. I'll note, as you can see here, primarily within the routing challenge, we're interested in how many buses does your system need? And in the start times challenge, we're interested in some of the cost drivers that are on that table, but also how are you accommodating school input? Okay. Now, a word from our sponsors, brief commercial break from the Brady Bunch episode today. So I can't stress enough the incredible generosity of the organizations and people I'm about to mention to you, because they've made this possible, and without it, it just would have been an idea at the bowling building that never would have come to fruition. You've heard from Steve Poftak before. Steve, you have been amazing from day one. My friend Will Austin gave me Steve's name a few months ago. I called Steve. I said, we've got this crazy idea. What do you think? He said, yes, let's do it. I want to help. And he's been beside us ever since then. Okay. Moving on, we're in this amazing space today at District Hall because of Steve's support, but also District Hall's support to make this happen for us. This is an incredible space. They're incredible champions for innovation in this city. Thank you. Thanks. Moving on to what we're calling our challenge sponsors. Again, this would not happen to the extent that it is without the 4 organizations that you're seeing here. Microsoft has been incredible over the last few weeks. It's really worth noting that they've helped tremendously just to generate buzz around this event. They invited us to this space 2 days ago for one of their tech coffee hours that they have on Thursday morning, where I felt incredibly out of place. Amy from Microsoft is here. Thank you again very, very much for your support. They're also making available Microsoft Azure to any participants in the challenge, and just recently they let us know that they've also released their Bing mapping API to all participants who might need to avail themselves of that. Moving on, Google has also been an incredible supporter through all of this, and over the last couple of days we were able to secure an agreement from Google whereby they would give us access to their mapping API as well. In fact, they're going to give us up to 1 billion queries across the challenge that would be distributed across a number of unique IDs for those participants who were involved. 2 other organizations that need to be mentioned here as people who basically put this idea on the map for us and allowed us to do it in a much more sophisticated way. The Hariri Institute from Boston University, I know we've got a couple of folks from there today. They've been a tremendous support for us in helping us to take our random artificial data set that's living on the website. You'll get a kick out of it because we've assigned all the students in that data set to Red Sox players who are in the Red Sox Hall of Fame. Red Sox opening day is in a couple days, which is crazy. They've allowed us to do that in a much, much smarter way than I could ever possibly even dream of. And lastly, SAS, and we have a gentleman by the name of Jeremiah Riddle who's here from the SAS today, came up from North Carolina to be here. They've done wonders in helping us to rethink how our bus stops are assigned, how we can potentially consolidate our bus stops. And when they started doing that work for us months ago, that really was one of the seeds that was planted that gave us the idea of the Transportation Challenge. Next slide, we'll talk about a few of the sponsors that people are also very excited about from more of a financial sense. very, very excited to announce that the Longfield Family Foundation and an anonymous donor have made possible awards of up to $15,000 for all participants in the 2 challenges. The way that we envision it right now is that each challenge will end in up to a $15,000 award for the solution judged to be the most effective for the district. The way that that will work is through performance-based contract, where we will give that participant up front $9,000 for the evaluation that we've put into their work to judge it to be the most effective. And then we want to be able to partner with that entity to work through any kinks that might come up out of that to make sure it works. There's a lot of exposure to this right now. We want to make sure that we do this right for the City of Boston and for Boston Public Schools. And by the time we evaluate these proposals, we will feel fully confident in the one that we've chosen. But we want to be able to go through a little bit extra work with that organization or that participant to make sure it works so that we can feel fully assured that we're going to put a solution in place that works for the 57,000 children in BPS and the many thousands of others in charter, private, and parochial schools that we transport.